Cool. Hi, and welcome back to the VoiceFirst Roundtable. This is season 2, episode 9. We're almost through the season of 10 episodes, talking to interesting people doing interesting things across this vast landscape of voice technology and AI. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of a company called Score Publishing based in Nashville, Tennessee. Very pleased to be joined by Ricardo Garcia-Amaya, CEO of VOIQ. Ricardo, say hello.
Thank you for inviting me, Bradley.
Ricardo, thank you for giving us some of your time. You are a very interesting person, not that we don't have those on this show, but you have taken an interesting path to an interesting place. So start just by telling us who you are and what VOIQ does.
For sure. I'll take you a little bit back. So I was born in New York, but raised in the outskirts of Bogota, Colombia, the capital of Colombia. Have you been to Colombia?
No, I have not.
All right. You got to write it down.
That's what I tell people about Nashville. Yes, I should go there.
There you go. So I was raised in a farm in the outskirts of Bogota with my 2 younger brothers, my parents, obviously, and until the age of 15 or so. And my dad's appointment, he was ambassador to the United Nations, that took us to New York. And in New York, the brothers stayed in New York while my mom and my dad kept going to different embassies, London, Madrid, and finally Thailand as a diplomat. We were not the typical diplomat kids. I was going to say spoiled diplomat kids, which usually seems to go along with it. But we didn't get to, go and be brought up in 100 countries, which could be great and also could be a little bit disruptive. So we stayed in the U.S. and I finished high school, then NYU for undergrad. Right out of my dorm room, I started a technology consulting firm working with organizations like the New York Public Library, which is one of the biggest library systems in the world. Best Buy, which is one of obviously the biggest electronic retailers in the country. And beyond that, I decided to get my MBA at NYU again. And after that, I worked at the mayor's office during the third term of Michael Bloomberg. It was an incredible, exciting opportunity to see how this huge organization, a 300,000 employee organization, operates. And I was working on developing the technology roadmap for the city, which was super exciting. And after that, I decided to help a friend run for mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. We won, and he became the first Latino mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, Angel Taveras. And I was in charge of a lot of the tech in the campaign, but my main focus was getting people out to vote and some aspect of fundraising through creating virtual call centers. And I remember building these call centers and remembering that in the previous 10 years, the technology had not improved whatsoever. It basically was the same piece of software. So I decided to build VOIQ, moved to Silicon Valley with my wife, who now actually works in the same space in voice, but for Google on the global product partnership team, specifically on the recipes and also finance, working with banks. And, when you ask how to cook lasagna to your Google Assistant, that's one of the areas that she's in charge of. So we moved to Silicon Valley after living me in New York City for 20 years and go through Y Combinator, which was awesome as a tech startup. We got funded by Y Combinator. My immediate mentors, Michael Siebel, who's the CEO, who sold this company for $1 billion to Amazon, Kassar, who sold 2 of his companies to Google. Now he's working on his 3rd one. And Gary, who sold this company to Twitter. And now he has a $500 million fund along with Alexis Hanahan, the founder of Reddit. So incredible mentorship, immediately paid off moving from New York City to Silicon Valley, and raised $5 million and off to the races with VOIQ. I have my 2 younger brothers actually are also tech founders and venture-backed founders in different companies. So we all have our own tech startups.
Yeah, I'm tired just even hearing you listen to all that.
That's right. A lot of work.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible journey. So, and you really answered one of my questions, which is how, somebody comes out of politics and political involvement of different types and ends up, starting a tech-oriented company, and you answered that, just something, filling a need that you had seen in that time, working with politics.
And it also has to do with scalability. So initially it's in politics, and then you said, you know what, we can definitely address an issue here in politics. And then you said, well, if we're going to be working in this space, what other area could be even bigger and more impact? And so you start making your way up, and eventually you end up where we are, which is, how to empower businesses to leverage voice bots that sound human, to have conversations with their customers, other prospects on the phone. And that's as big and as scalable as our imagination could take us, which is the way, I guess, in many ways, the Silicon Valley ethos, right? And that's where we landed. But we definitely had to go through different stages of how bigger can we go in terms of scalability. And this is where we ended up.
So with VOIQ, one of the, I would call it a defining characteristic of voice so far, just the landscape, certainly post Alexa, that companies getting into this space and doing whatever it is that they do, in your case, along the chatbots and voice bot realm, at first they start off as generalists. And then what happens inevitably is that either that first big client comes along and there's learning specifically related to a certain vertical, or some attribute of the technology product itself lends itself more toward one vertical or another. One way or the other, people end up gravitating, so we've seen so far, to one particular vertical over another. Where has most of your business with VOIQ so far been, and do you feel that happening for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Bradley. So the easiest way to think about the point where we are in voice, because you said basically, in many ways, you're describing how voice is such an early technology, and the way that is being applied now, specifically to businesses, right? In the consumer, you already get to see how Google, Amazon, all the big players are leveraging for the consumer. But in business is like day one. And businesses are testing the channel and across different areas of their business. We have been focusing in sales and marketing. That has been our go-to place, mostly because it's revenue generating, and the willingness to pay, it's immediately there. And so that has been our first target. However, when we sell to mid-sized businesses and enterprise, and our typical deal size is somewhere between $50,000 to $200,000 contracts. So we're kind of at the enterprise level type of contracts in annual contract value. But when they come to a demo to learn about, they come with a use case and they said, hey, we have this, we would like to be able to, when somebody uses our form, fills out a form online, we would like to follow up with a phone call triggered by that action and call the person who filled out a form who's interested in car insurance. Can your platform, your SaaS platform, do that? And we said yes. And then we have we start sharing of all the different use cases in which other companies are using it and the functionality of it. And usually these companies that come with one use case walk out with like 10 other, and they invite other leaders from different areas of the team. And they said, wait a second, we have an issue in logistics. And in this specific example, I'm talking about the biggest marketplace in the world. Oh, interesting. We were thinking of using it this way, but you know what? If you can actually do this, we need you even like tomorrow in logistics, right? So it's a moment where companies are just learning about it. The awareness stage for voice in the business space is probably, we're going to be in awareness stage for several years, and there's going to be definitely early adopters. And adopting voice, I mean, we're looking at a high percentage of Fortune 500 companies already using voice throughout the enterprise, right? But at scale is going to take a little while they learn where does voice move the needle the most in their department. So yeah, super early. And I usually refer to the comparison of email 25 years ago. When email came out, you could use it to communicate with your parents or this and that, more at the personal level. And then business starting to pick up and say, well, what can you use email for, right? Can I use it for sales? Can I use it for customer success? Can I use it for customer service? And little by little, you fast forward, and now you have unicorn companies that specialize in sales automation specifically for sales, right? Like Outreach, which is which is a unicorn, is founded by Manny Medina, Latino. Or Drift, specifically on chatbots, right? So it has evolved in the email space. It evolved to the point where there are specific SaaS companies automating that specific area. We are still very early in voice. I think you will see many of these equivalents to companies like Outreach in email automation for sales, and Drift, which is the chatbot automation for sales, 6 years out in voice, in the space where we are. And we're the first SaaS platform to provide the businesses to be able to build these voice bots and leverage them for phone calls.
That's an interesting analogy. Back to email, and you got me thinking with that, because you're right. The first thing I ever had, my family had, was something called Prodigy. You familiar?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Oh yeah.
And we didn't have CompuServe, we had Prodigy, and boy, kids growing up now would have a real problem trying to make sense of that. But I remember on Prodigy, and then from Prodigy we went to America Online. But with Prodigy, we had our first email. And if you got an email, 99.9% likelihood that it was relevant, like from a family member or a friend about something germane. Like, it's like, oh yes, I got an email. It's like, and then
It
now,
was a big
of course,
moment.
it was. That's no joke.
Yeah.
It was something special. And now, when you get an email, take any particular email you might get, it's like the probability of a meteor landing, on the face of the planet and destroying everything. Like, that's the likelihood that it's from a family member, and or from a friend, asking you something, that you want to read. So that, just even that mental journey back in time to think about that is interesting, because you're right. What starts off one way does not stay that way. And that's what we're going through with voice right now.
And actually, an interesting piece that ties to this, an analogy of emails and the noise, right? You're describing initially there was not much noise, right? And then you fast forward like 5 years, 10 years, and then you get the opposite, right? Which is just every other email that you get, or every email that you get, is spam, right? It's just garbage. And then you have to fast forward 5, 10 years later, and now that gets us, closer to where we are. And I would say within the past 5, 10 years, we solved that issue. Technology solved that issue of filtering all the spam for the most part. I mean, compared to what we had, the noise that we had 15, 20 years ago.
You're right.
And that's just happening in the phone space, because it's just that the revolution had not hit the phone space. So what we're dealing as of, the past, 15 years has been that spam period of where, you have robocalls, unsolicited robocalls, no way to identify, and it's just chaos, right? And the people carrying out, the companies that carry out robocalls are minuscule. I mean, are a tiny set that just bombard everything, and no real company with reputation would ever use robocalls, because one of the things that the principles in sales and marketing is you really need to understand who your ICP is, your ideal customer profile. And whether it's email or whether it is a phone call, you should never call somebody who's not your ideal customer profile, because all you're doing is make them angry and hate your brand, where before they didn't even know that they could hate your brand. So in sales and marketing, there's a sacred rule, and that is that you contact the fewer people that you can, that you know that they're at your ideal customer profile. So that applies to phone and email. Unfortunately, we're still in the space of that noise. And over the next 5 to 10 years, the phone space, it's time for the phone channel to be cleaned up by several new technologies that are coming out there, some pioneer or pushed by Google. Others are already in the hands of companies like Twilio that let you know the name of the company calling you and the person behind it and the purpose of it, right? And this way you have less noise. And this way is extremely beneficial for businesses, real businesses, because when you use, whether you use email or the phone channel, the main principle here has to be relevant, right? So you want to use the phone channel at the most relevant point of a prospective buyer, a customer, et cetera, right? At the moment, a customer success, when a customer should be ready to upgrade, right? So it all comes down to the intelligence. So we're getting closer to that point where it will be cleaned out, and just like it happened with email, and they will bring more transparency and clarity, and real businesses will be able to be very successful due to this transparency coming into this channel. So that's an interesting piece, more from the telephony piece rather than the voice bot technology itself. But that's the confluence. I mean, this is what all come together, right? And that's why it made it a perfect timing for us to do this.
You've got such a good grasp on the sort of the historical underpinnings of the technology. I applaud that.
Thank you.
What you just said leads me into something I definitely want to ask you about. So I'm going to ask you about this, and then I'll ask you about the Latino Tech Leaders Gathering, and then we'll call it a day. There was an article in the New York Times last week, and I forget the headline of it, but it said basically, surprise, telemarketers, pollsters, any number of baskets of people that are calling other people unsolicited are having unprecedented, certainly relatively to recent times, possibly in absolute terms in all time, success in not only getting the person they're calling to answer, but also in keeping them on the phone for the whole time in many cases. You can't even get these people off the phone. It's like, my God, okay, I'm done. I find that fascinating, and I'm wondering if that, if artifacts from that or some of the trend lines from what's causing that to be true have been things that you've seen show up in some of your data with VOIQ.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I read that article. So we have a couple of combinations of type of calls that we carry out for our customers through our platform. And one is completely synthetic voices. So it's a synthetic voice that calls you, "Hi, Bradley," and it's fully customized. So it says, "Hi, Bradley. I noticed that you interacted with her. You downloaded a white paper today for X product. Would you like to set up an appointment with one of our experts who can tell you a little bit more? We can schedule a time," that type of thing, right? So we carry a conversation within, I would say, no longer than a minute and a half, no longer than maybe 4 or 5 questions. That's the type of conversation that synthetic voice can do. We can also do something that mixes, I guess it's called overdub, where you mix a pre-recording of a human voice and inserts a synthetic clone of your voice for a specific word. So for example, we can record your call saying, "Hi, this is the department of whatever," asking somebody, and "Hi, Robert," right? You might not say Robert in every call, but we replace those tokens with your own voice in that sentence. Kind of if you're familiar with Descript for podcasting, that they allow you to replace words. So that technology is already on our platform, so we can do that. The reason why I say this, it's because going back to your article, you said people are, it's definitely an anomaly, right? That they actually do not mind talking to somebody on the phone for long periods of time. I would say definitely the circumstances here lend themselves, but you also mentioned the word unsolicited, which makes it even more of an anomaly, right? Because we don't do 99% of the businesses on our platform, and the calls that we do are not unsolicited, or at least they're not irrelevant. So, it could be, I don't know, talking about solar panels, but you actually live in a position where, all your neighbors have solar panels, and the conversation is very relevant and very customized to what you are, right? And you called you at the right time, at the right place, given that you've made research on buying a solar panel for your home, right? So relevancy is huge. The aspect of the unsolicited, that's why I made that article so interesting, unless it's a call regarding health, right? In which case it's not necessarily unsolicited. It's very pertinent, and people are willing to give that information because they want more answers and more information about what services are available. And this is one of the areas that we offer U.S. government, national organizations to use our platform for free when it comes to this topic. And we're working with cities and governments in a couple of countries that are leveraging it this way. So you can call in mass with customized conversations about health, very important health questions to make sure that nobody's out there in danger of, not having a meal or access to testing, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, I read that article. I found it really interesting. Definitely, I believe it's an anomaly. It's the fact that, it's a scary time, it's uncertain, and somebody's willing to stay with you for longer than usual, which would not work for our voice bots, by the way. It'd actually be a problem. We don't have any additional conversation. It's a narrow focus, the natural language understanding. We train them for specific scenarios. We deploy them, and we don't expect them to be talking about, anything outside the scope. So that would not be a good case for our voice bots. We haven't seen that yet.
That's interesting. Yeah. And even it just helps to have a finger on the pulse of the collective mindset, and that's really what it speaks to. I was with my parents over the weekend, and my parents will be notorious for picking up the phone no matter who's calling, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? And my dad, and I finally got them to get rid of their landline, so that doesn't just ring off the hook anymore. And so it's like much quieter now. But my dad was like, yeah, someone called me on my cell phone the other day, and I just answered it. I was like, why? Because we were talking about this article. I was sharing that, and I said, why would you do that? He's like, why would I not do that?
Why not? Right.
And
what's
I'm like,
the alternative?
Yeah, this conversation no longer makes any sense to have. We're too far apart. But it's sign of the times. I want to conclude by asking you about your involvement within the Latino community out in California. Really interesting what you've put together with this group of people that gathered together, this very high profile Latino technology executives. Share with us a little bit about what you've done and why.
Yep. So when I moved from New York to Silicon Valley, I only knew one fellow Latino tech founder. He was venture backed by Andreessen Horowitz, raised $5 million. And I asked him, what other Latino founder or Latino VC do you know in this space? And it was very, very kind of anecdotal, not organized, kind of like, oh yeah, I know this guy and that person and this woman. Not sure necessarily if they're Latino, but I think they are, right? So I initially started to map it. I did the homework. And the first thing that I did was, well, let me bring visibility. So the next person that comes to Silicon Valley, the next Latino that comes to Silicon Valley does not have to start from scratch. So I created a page with great SEO, literally top Latino tech leaders, right? And list them with their KPIs, et cetera. And of course, I got to meet them. And it started growing. And of course, that's when I started realizing, wow, we have Latino founders that have sold companies in the billions. We have several times. We have Latino venture capitalists that, whether it's first, second, third generation American, and they are leading, billions of dollars in capital. And soon after, I said, well, this is crazy that we do not meet. So, 6 years ago, I said, well, we should definitely, at least, I know it's going to be really difficult to get really busy tech founders it might be easier to get VCs, but hard to get tech founders in one room. So we bring them together once or twice a year for a couple of hours to all to really be able to work together and help each other, and then also work in helping the next generation that are looking for answers, right? Whether you are early stage, you might want to talk to somebody who just raised, if you're raising $1 million, you might want to talk to somebody who just raised 2-3 million, right? You don't necessarily need to go talk to the person who's gone IPO twice. Actually, it's probably the worst person you want to talk to, because they're so far away from the early, they'll just say, just go to my friend and get a check for 2 million, right? You're like, no, that doesn't work at the early stage. So that helps the next generation of Latino, Latina tech founders and VCs coming up the ranks to know that there's a group of very successful founders and VCs in the network. And of course, we communicate daily when we're not coming together physically, which now obviously that's not even a possibility, but virtually we're having conversations every day. This group of, I would say right now it's 50 top Latino tech leaders that have, incredible piece of success selling their companies and building incredible companies, being unicorns, achieving unicorn status in really interesting areas, in chatbots, sales automation, you name it. So yeah, that's the journey of the top Latino tech leaders. And, we have incredible people that support us and join us as special guests, and very high level. And Marcelo Claudia among one of them as well, from SoftBank, running a $120 billion fund. He's probably the most influential Latino venture capital person, if not just in general VC in the world. Forget about the denomination of Latino. He's probably one of the most important VCs in the world at this point. So we have a really incredible group of leaders, and I'm really proud of that, and we all support each other.
That's very cool. So yeah, I mean, you're doing great work with VOIQ. It's not just interesting. I mean, I think it's inspiring to see the civic-minded nature of what you're doing as well, which is why I wanted to touch on it here. Ricardo, thank you for being part of the VoiceFirst Roundtable with us, and not just taking the time, but sharing your experience and expertise with us as well.
Thank you very much, Bradley.
For the VoiceFirst Roundtable, Season 2, Episode 9, thank you for listening, watching if you're watching on YouTube. Until next time.